Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Florida is recognized for 5 minutes in support of his motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to make it abundantly clear exactly what this motion to recommit does, so I'm going to read it. It's very short. Nothing in this act or any amendment made by this act may be construed to diminish any protections under Title IX of the Education Amendments of 1972. The threat that this bill possesses for women's sports at every level is profound. As described by the nation's leading expert on sports, sex, and biology, Professor Doreen Lamblett-Coleman, she states, there is a significant performance difference between males and females. Testosterone is the primary driver of that difference. There is a wide gap, no overlap, between the male and female testosterone ranges. There is no scientific doubt that testosterone is the reason that men as a group perform better than women in sports. Indeed, this is why men and women dope with androgens. Requiring that biological females face competition from biological males will mean the end of women's sports in any meaningful sense. As tennis great Martina Navratilova has written in the Washington Post, in its current form, the Equality Act would do significant damage to Title IX and to the Amateur Sports Act, which governs sports outside of educational settings.
It's correct. The House is not in order. Gentleman is recognized.
The new legislation would amend the 1964 Civil Rights Act by redefining sex to include gender identity. Without an exception, the definition would apply to all amendments to the 1964 Act, including Title IX. Most schools, colleges, the NCAA, and the Olympic Committee would be affected because they receive federal funds and operate in interstate commerce. The legislation would make it unlawful to differentiate among girls and women in sports on the basis of sex for any purpose. For example, a sports team couldn't treat a transgender woman differently from a woman who is not transgender on the grounds that the former is male-bodied. Yet the reality is that putting male and female-bodied athletes together is co-ed or open sport. And in open sport, females lose. Some Equality Act advocates argue that this is hyperbole and outdated stereotype. They say, as the ACLU has, that there is ample evidence that girls can compete and win against boys. They are wrong. The evidence is unequivocal that starting in puberty in every sport except sailing, shooting, and riding, there will always be significant numbers of boys and men who would beat the best girls and women in head-to-head competition. Claims to the contrary are simply a denial of science. Those are not my words. Those are the words of female tennis great Martina Navratilova. And footnote 44 of the committee report on this bill, the Democrat majority states, the committee acknowledges that the addition of sex as a protected characteristic under Title VI of the bill raises some questions about how the revised Title VI should be read in relation to Title IX of the Education Amendment. It is the committee's intention not to alter in any way Title IX or the scope or availability of its exemptions as they currently stand. Rather, Title IX and the revised Title VI should be read as being complementary provisions that provide overlapping protection against sex discrimination, unquote. But of course, we all know that allowing biological males to compete against biological females is not an overlapping protection. It is instead a violation of women's rights to engage in competitive sports on an even playing field and to enjoy the protection of their own spaces reserved for biological females. And so this motion to recommit is essential to protecting the rights of women and girls in sports that H.R. 5 currently denies. Even the Obama administration wrote a letter to schools regarding Title IX enforcements, making clear that they should continue to be able to enforce policies that are, quote, tailored requirements based on sound, current, and research-based medical knowledge about the impact of the individual's participation on the competitive fairness or physical safety of the sport. Adoption of this motion to recommit will not kill the bill. It will not delay the bill's consideration. If this motion to recommit is adopted, the bill proceeds directly to final passage. If H.R. 5 becomes law, our daughters will be asking us, what did you do when moves were made to eliminate women's sports? It's worth considering that question now before it's too late. I urge all my colleagues to join me in protecting Title IX and protecting women's sports and supporting this motion to recommit.
Gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from gentlewoman from California seek recognition?
To oppose the motion to recommit with all of my heart.
The gentlewoman is recognized.
I can't believe that we're standing here and having a man tell me what kind of protections I need in sports. This is fear-mongering about trans women playing in sports. Are you kidding me? I don't know if my colleagues on the other side of the aisle realize that they've met trans people, but they have. They definitely have. And I've met many. And this motion reflects nothing more than the prejudice of my colleagues. My staff have put together a lot of talking points for you today, but it's much simpler than that. The Equality Act ensures that LGBTQ women and girls who are lesbian, bisexual, or transgender will all have the same opportunities as their peers in sports, in housing, in jobs. The discrimination that trans individuals face just trying to live their lives every single day is something beyond what most of us could ever imagine. Through my work on the issue of homelessness, I saw trans women disproportionately affected by discrimination at every single stage of their lives. They have higher rates of poverty, higher rates of sexual abuse, higher rates of homelessness, and I can tell you, no trans person is trying to game the system to participate in sports. That does not happen, and that is a sad scare tactic that has no place on the floor of the people's house. State schools and athletic organizations across the country have found for many years that letting LGBTQ student athletes, including girls and women who are transgender, participate in sports does not harm women and girls' sports in any way. As an athlete, athletic success is based on so many factors, like individual ability and strength, and those abilities vary widely for people who aren't even trans. It has nothing to do with whether one's transgender or not. In fact, major advocates for women and girls in sports, such as the National Women's Law Center, the Women's Sports Foundation, Women's Leaders in College Sports, and others, support trans-inclusive policies and oppose efforts to exclude transgender people from participating in sports. This is not a new concept. Trans people have participated in sports for years. Stop the fear-mongering. This is 2019, and we are not afraid of the boogeyman that you're trying to create. We are ready to move forward and tell all of our constituents, all of our communities, all of Americans that they matter equally. You, my colleagues, are on the wrong side of history, and we will be waiting for you on the other side when we reject this amendment and pass H.R. 5. And I yield to the gentleman from New Hampshire.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you to my colleague, my fellow co-chair.
Gentleman from New Hampshire is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you to my colleague, Representative Hill from California, my fellow co-chair of the Equality Caucus. As she rightfully notes, nothing in the Equality Act infringes upon women's rights. If it did, we wouldn't be supporting it so vociferously today. This MTR is an army of words marching in search of an issue that doesn't exist. For those of us who have been involved in the fight for equality, this tactic isn't new or surprising. We've seen it before. We've seen the deliberate distractions, the unfounded fears, the faulty arguments on our way toward progress. This legislation simply gives LGBTQ individuals full equality, nothing more and nothing less. When we end legal discrimination in housing, employment, and public services, we will steer our nation closer to the full realization of its founding principles and the notion that we are all created equal. As a proud member of the LGBTQ community, I can attest that attitudes in this country have changed for the better, and it's time that our laws catch up. Congress can send a message to LGBTQ Americans everywhere that we see you, that we celebrate you for who you are. This vote will change laws, and it will save lives. In passing the Equality Act today, we can say unequivocally that everyone matters, that everyone can be themselves, that no one should live in fear or be treated as a second-class citizen in the United States of America, not today and not ever. Full equality under the law. Nothing less and nothing more. I urge my colleagues to vote no on this motion to recommit. I welcome you to become a part of history. Join us on the right side of history. Do the right thing today. Vote no on this MTR and stand for full equality for the LGBTQ community. I yield back.